How does it seem like this week you've been kind of dodging the reparations question? Senator Harris and Senator Warren have both kind of spoken out and said that they agree with some form of reparations.
Well, the question is, I'm not dodging the question. The question is, what do we mean by reparations? I mean, it seems to me a lot of people mean a lot of different things. To my mind, it means that we have to deal with the fact that there is enormous disparity between the black community and the white community, and that issue has got to be addressed. And I've indicated to you some of the ways that I think it should be addressed.
Well, I think they mean some type of economic empowerment to the African descendants of slaves.
But what does that mean, economic empowerment? I just talked about the fact that I would do my best to change the banking system to make sure that we end racism, that we pay attention to distressed communities, that people get the loans they need to make the investments they need.
What about straight cash payouts?
No.
How much you want,
You
Sean?
agree with that? Why don't you agree with that?
Well, first of all, you mean just a check to every African American?
Yes.
Well, then there's a check to every Native American who were nearly wiped out when the settlers first came here. I think the way we go forward is to build America together. There are distressed communities, white communities, there are distressed Latino communities. Right now, what you have is a government owned and controlled by big money interests who worries about Wall Street and the drug companies. We're going to change that. And we're going to pay attention to the needs of working families and low-income families in this country in a way that you have never seen.
But this government has also systemically oppressed us in a way that they haven't oppressed other communities, through slavery, through segregation, now mass incarceration. And I think it should be something done specifically for African Americans.
Well, and all of those issues, all right, we are going to deal with mass incarceration. And we're going to invest, I think at the end of the day, if we end the discrimination that exists in financial services, in health care, in education, if we guarantee health care to all people, if we, and we're working on a particular program, make sure that every person in this country has a job, because there's enough work to be done dealing with climate change, dealing with our crumbling infrastructure, I would suggest to you that not only the African American community, but every community will be a hell of a lot better off than they are today.
Do you think Democrats really believe in reparations for African Americans, or is it just a good talking point for this campaign cycle?
I don't want to speak for other people.
Mm-hmm.
What about
they want
what does
to
that
support?
mean? What do they mean? I'm not sure that anyone's very clear. What I've just said is that I think we must do everything that we can to address the massive level of disparity that exists in this country.
I'll tell you what they mean, because Elizabeth Warren has said black families have had a much steeper hill to climb. We need systematic structural changes to address that. Julian Castro has said, I have long thought that this country would be better off if we did find a way to do that, reparations.
Well, I agree with what Elizabeth said.
So you would support reparations?
But read what she said. What does that mean? She means, I think, I don't want to put words into her mouth, is what I said. Okay?
African Americans are starting to call for reparations for the many years of stolen labor through slavery. Is that something that you would support as president?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it would be, first of all, its likelihood of getting through a Congress is nil. Second of all, I think it would be, very divisive.
why not support reparations then?
What do you mean by reparations?
By reparations for slave defendants.
I know, but what does that mean exactly?
Money.
Well, I think that right now our job is to address the crises facing the American people and our communities. And I think there are better ways to do that than just writing out a check.
Bernie Sanders isn't for reparations at all for African Americans, but guess who he's okay with having reparations? His own people. Ladies and gentlemen, you're seeing here the Holocaust Rail Justice Act. Now, this is the reparations that Bernie Sanders was for, because as we know that he says an emphatic no when it comes to African Americans and their hurt and pain, but he says yes to his people. Now, this is the bill that he was pushing for. Now, it says a bill to ensure that the courts of the United States may provide an impartial forum for claims brought by United States citizens and others against any railroad organized as a separate legal entity arising from the deportation of United States citizens and others to Nazi concentration camps on trains owned or operated by such railroad and by the heirs and survivors of such persons. Now, they paid the $60 million to the Treasury Department, and they dispersed the money to the Holocaust survivors. Now, Bernie Sanders didn't say anything about that. He co-sponsored that particular bill. But when it comes to you, ladies and gentlemen, what does he say? No. To get a little breakdown of it, we'll go to the New York Post, and we'll scroll down here. They talk about that. The money should break down to about $100,000 for each for the survivors and tens of thousands of dollars for spouses. Okay, so that's how that was broke down. So they got 100,000 each spouses. You know, people that wasn't even a survivor, they got tens of thousands. But yet Bernie Sanders says no when it comes to you. Bernie Sanders is extremely foul, extremely, and I'm glad all the receipts are coming out on him. So as you saw, Bernie Sanders signed on to that bill, okay? Bernie Sanders also signed on to the Clinton crime bill that decimated the black community. So
said that there needs to be some kind of reparations to descendants of slaves to compensate for years of slavery and discrimination against African Americans in this country. Take a listen to Bernie Sanders, one of your campaign rivals, at a CNN town hall when it was pointed out that you and Elizabeth Warren support some form of reparations.
What do they mean?
Do you think that there should be actual monetary payments to descendants of slaves? Do you support more like what Senator Sanders is talking about, policies such as child care and education that help those who are disadvantaged?
Well, you know, what I said was that that I've long believed that this country should address slavery, the original sin of slavery, including by looking at reparations. And if I'm president, then I'm going to appoint a commission or task force to determine the best way to do that. There's a tremendous amount of disagreement on how we would do that. But let me just say something about Senator Sanders' response there, because he was also asked this question in 2016. Mm-hmm. What he said on The View, I think, the other day was that he didn't think the best way to address this was for the United States to write a check. To my mind, that may or may not be the best way to address it. However, it's interesting to me that when it comes to Medicare for all, health care, you know, the response there has been, we need to write a big check. That when it comes to tuition-free or debt-free college, the answer has been, we need to write a big check. And so if the issue is compensating the descendants of slaves, I don't think that the argument about writing a big check ought to be the argument that you make if you're making an argument that a big check needs to be written for a whole bunch of other stuff.
Interesting.
So if under the Constitution we compensate people because we take their property, why wouldn't you compensate people who actually work?
Well, you had a sister that decided to ask him a straight and direct question.
Part of the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow in the U.S. is the legacy of income inequality in the U.S. What is your position on reparations to the descendants of slaves?
Well, as I just indicated, there are massive disparities that must be addressed. There is legislation that I like, introduced by Congressman Jim Clyburn. It's called the 10-20-30 legislation, which focuses federal resources in a very significant way on distressed communities, communities that have high levels of poverty. So as I've just indicated, you know, I think we have to do everything that we can to end institutional racism in this country. It is not acceptable to me that the rate of childhood poverty among the African American community is over 30% in this country. That is beyond belief. That African Americans die from cancer at higher rates than whites. So we're going to do everything we can to put resources into distressed communities and improve lives for those people who have been hurt from the legacy of slavery.
So what is your position specifically on reparations? I asked the question.
Wah, 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 wah.
Could you repeat our assignment?
Bernie Sanders sounded just like Charlie Brown's teacher in his response. The system that was created here in the United States was built off of the backs of our ancestors. And that system gave them this big wealth gap. And they say it takes 246 years to catch up to white folks' wealth in this country. Literally the same amount of time that chattel slavery was legal.